son of a
but
bitch.
people. We cannot sum up a man's life with a bunch of numbers on a computer screen. Right? We all need to look into our hearts and go, do I think this dude is going to die in a few years or not? Is old Leland here going to fight off a man with the last name Reaper, first name who goes by the last name Reaper, first name Grimm? Or will this base jumping, crocodile wrestling, shark diving, volcano luging, bear fighting, snake wrangling, motocross racing bastard die? And the answer is no, friends, which is why myself...
That's so good.
It's just it's one of those things where it was like when he's listing all of the things, I was like, if the sound talent group doesn't use this, or Dave doesn't use this as a pitch, like he's like to why a band should come or talent should come to the agency, then it's like y'all are fucking up, because that's the pitch right there.
That's awesome. I should make that the pitch. What movie is that? I know that movie.
Along Came Polly.
That's
Ben Stiller and Jennifer Aniston. Yeah, fucking
sure.
great.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's kind of as good of an intro as there probably will be. You know, for those that maybe don't know you and what you do, it's more of kind of your ancillary passions that kind of have always intrigued me, because, you know, flying, like you fly planes. I think you can do helicopters now, I think I've seen, and I think you said you had just got you graduated to a different kind of pilot's license for something else. I don't know necessarily if it was a bigger aircraft or whatever, but
no, I've been flying for 16 years now, and I kind of like always continue learning. Like I love aviation, so I always keep going to school, even though I'm also a flight instructor myself now. So like, and I have been for a long time, I guess, but yeah, like the last new rating I got was the ATP rating, which stands for Airline Transport Pilot, which is the rating you need if you're going to like fly for airlines and stuff like that. So that was a goal of mine that I always wanted to do. And I finally did it about a year ago now, right before the pandemic. I finished that. I did it in a citation jet. So I'm also rated to fly citation jets now. And yeah, pretty cool. So that was a lot of fun.
You know, it's something that's kind of been interesting about that. And as you said, you know, you're someone who kind of is an instructor at this point, but you're still learning yourself. Do you feel that same kind of thirst for knowledge while still being at a level that most would kind of, you know, probably say like, oh, here's kind of where I'm going to like, I don't need any more knowledge. I'm an instructor. So like, I basically am at the highest level of, you know, knowledge I can be, which I don't think you ever stop learning. So I think that's horseshit first and foremost. But some people would say like, oh, if you're an instructor, boom, you're done. You reach the plateau and you're good to go. Do you feel that because your thirst of knowledge applies in that realm, do you feel that you are able to apply the same thing in your actual day-to-day job of, you know, some would say, well, if you're managing and all this kind of stuff, like that's kind of, you know, you're one of the bigger agency people. However, it seems that you also are trying to learn at all times to grow as a person, to grow your business, to grow mainly just as a person, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. It's like, I think that if you feel like you have learned everything and know everything in one particular, you know, facet of life or whatever, you're probably either have an ego and are wrong, or, you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing that anymore, because I feel like things get boring if you've kind of done it all, you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like continuing to reach new heights, new milestones, doing new things in life, achieving new goals, all those things I think are important. They give you reasons to wake up every day and things to try to go and strive to be better at, you know?
Do you feel that is something that allows you to be successful in your business?
Definitely. I think with my business, which is, you know, it's a bit like broad, right? Like I used to be like started off getting as just an agent, and then I started Velocity Records. I managed producers for a very long time. I'm a partner in Absolute Merch and Taste of Ink, which is a merch company that we manufacture merch for a lot of big bands and stuff like that. And I think, I feel like I'm always trying to achieve that next level and trying to experience new things, and trying to get better at what I do. I remember when I first started booking, it was like, man, if I could just have a band that could sell out 200 cap rooms, you know what I mean? And then I got that, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I had a band that could sell out 500 cap rooms? And then I got a few of those, and then it was like, okay, what if I, could book some bands that could sell out like 1,000 cap, like House of Blues type rooms, and then, arenas, and I experienced that. And, and you're always, I feel like you should always be striving for these new kind of milestones, because you can't be a good agent if you're not, right? Like if you're not thinking of your artists with that bigger picture, if you're thinking like, oh, I'm content with where they're at, you probably shouldn't be their agent. You know what I mean? Like you need to have a vision on how to get a band to that next level in order to come up with a strategy and try to be thinking long term and outside the box. And I think that if you're not doing that, that artist probably deserves better.
I think it's just interesting because, and I'm gonna parlay it into this, and maybe this will make sense, maybe it won't. Very much like Dewey, I kind of find my way through some of the questions I have or what I've been thinking about. But I've recently been kind of going through some therapy over the last couple of weeks for the first time, and so something that has been kind of diligent in that for me is, kind of identifying like boundaries and so forth, and kind of trying to learn from my past, learning from other experiences I've had with other people and so forth. And, something I've kind of thought of and realized is, it seems like at times you can be stagnant, not necessarily because of anything of your own, but kind of just the people you surround yourself with. If they're not really motivated to do anything, it's kind of easy to fall into that lull as well at times and not realize you're even in one, because it's just what you're used to at that point. It becomes your day to day. And so it was kind of interesting in thinking about, your job, where I feel like maybe there are people in the industry that are like, I get this check, I don't necessarily I have my bands and they do this. I have a good roster and it makes me blank them out. And they're maybe more financially driven versus goal driven. And so at that point, it sort of becomes this thing where I feel like as if I were the talent and I were to see someone who is habitually doing not only like achieving goals and setting goals in their profession, but then going like, okay, so I'm a pilot, and then I want to go do this, and then I want to go do this, that I would be more inclined to be like, I want to go fucking work with that guy, because he's not content just with what he's doing. He wants to do more and above and grow as a person. So if he's going to do that for himself, what will he do for us? Like, talking about, you kind of being in a term I kind of came up with is you're in the business of investing in people. And so if you can't invest in yourself, why would I and have success with that? Why would I believe that you can do that for me?
Sure.
And when I kind of thought about that, that was really an interesting kind of like concept, kind of the concept of investing in people is what you're in, basically.
Yeah, no, I've never really looked at it in the way that you just articulated that. But I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've never really thought about like how an artist may perceive the things I do outside of my job relating back to them. But that was interesting to hear you kind of articulate it that way. And I wonder if if some of the artists I work with do consciously think about it like that. That's really interesting. But yeah, and I mean, I think it's weird when people don't have that attitude, right? Because like, what are you waking up for every day? You know what I mean? Like what are you working towards? What are you trying to achieve? Are you just getting up, going through the motions, going to sleep and doing it again? Like, I don't, you know what I mean? What's the purpose of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of the thing. Like I said, is It's kind of funny because it's like going to therapy. It was just like, I had an event that kind of triggered something where I was like, man, like I, as kind of an empath, take on a lot of shit. And then I don't have anywhere for me to really get rid of it on top of my own stuff. So then I was like, like I had an event a couple of weeks ago and I was like, I think I need to go see someone finally. And it's been kind of interesting because, we start learning about how to change ourselves so we can have better relationships with ourselves, with other people, and so forth, and managing expectations and managing these relationships. And it kind of, a big word and a big phrase for me lately has kind of been boundaries. I think something I've not been good at is setting boundaries and really adhering to them. And that really kind of made me think of, how I do a lot of things. And I think very much like you, not to the extremes of you, but very much like you are, where it's like, I do this. And now I do another podcast with a co-host of mine. I do his show. And then, I'm into sports. I'm, play video games. I work on the podcast. I have a full-time job. I'm married, like have some whatever of social life you can at this point currently, but it's how to set boundaries to where you're not basically burning yourself out by trying to be everywhere all at once and give yourself wholly to all those things. And knowing how much of what you do between base jumping, going on these trips, doing all these adventures, flying, learning about flying, having a business, being married, doing things that you're into and passionate about, how have you found that you've been able to traverse that and not have any burnout in any one thing, while also, I guess, not letting any one thing slip either?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like, honestly, prior to the pandemic, balance was like a really big struggle for me, especially with like with my marriage and stuff. My wife's awesome and super supportive of everything I do, but she wants time with me, right? Which is
Right.
fair, and that was really hard to balance prior to the pandemic. I think the pandemic has helped me to help me to understand the importance
Mm-hmm.
of that balance and having to sacrifice some places, in order to maybe prioritize other places, but really trying not to put too much on your plate, right? And that's a hard thing for me. That's something I always struggle with because I always want to do new things. I always want to, like we were talking about, like kind of achieve these different milestones and like continuing to work towards new goals. So for me, like that's always been a real struggle, is like figuring out, okay, like something's got to give and I don't want any of it to give. So what's it going to be? I try to fit it all in, and it ends up with me like not sleeping much and blah, 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 staying up late, doing all these things. And so I think now that I've been forced to have some of that balance due to the pandemic, I think when I get to the other side of the pandemic, I'll be in a better place suited for that. And whether that means, I have to kind of like take certain things out of my life, take a little less off, like take a little off my plate, so I have a little less on my plate, or maybe it's, hiring a little more staff to get a little more support in what we're doing so that I can free up some time in certain aspects of the job, whatever. But those are all things that I've been thinking about a lot. And that's been, that's honestly been a struggle for me for my whole adult life because I always want to do so much stuff. So yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I think that's something I actually struggle with pretty regularly.
I think it's just kind of funny because, like, for me, sometimes I'll use this podcast as almost like Marin-esque, where I'll kind of be going through something myself and I'm like, okay, let me throw my fucking problem on somebody else. Let's see if we can work on it together to get through it. And, for a while, like when I had quit my full-time job to kind of do something part-time and earn money kind of at my discretion and when I wanted to work, doing like shifting, all that kind of stuff, so I could focus more on the podcast and the opportunities that seemingly were coming to me at that point. And it became a thing where it's like, I became so money oriented where I'm like, okay, I'm going to fucking work like a 12, 15 hour day because the money's coming in, I'm doing good. And maybe it'll allow me to like fuck quote unquote fuck off for a day to like, now I can spend like this day with my wife, or I can spend it doing podcast shit all day. Like, and it was really interesting that when you have no structure, you like know, like I got to go punch in from this time to this time, and then these hours are now essentially mine, barring you having anything else going on. It was really weird how the lack of a schedule made me find more of a schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I don't think people understand, like, because when you have the quote unquote freedom to do kind of whatever, it almost forces you to figure out a way to add structure, which is funny because that's, for me, it was a thing of like, I don't want a fucking boss. I don't want hours. I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And then I'll be goddamned if like I didn't basically give myself like, all right, here are my parameters. I need to hit this. Here's my goals, my metrics, and all that shit. And then I was like, well, son of a bitch, I'm just doing it anyway. But like, it's weird how you want your life to kind of be very routine and then fit into some kind of a box, even if you don't want that.
Right. Yeah. 100%, man. I think that's human nature, you know, and that's how you get ahead, is to really kind of put things, you know, into some sort of structure. Like you have to have some sort of plan, even if it's, you know, like a subconscious thing, right? Like you may not actually be sitting down saying, all right, every day between like 3 and 5, I'm going to do this or do that. But ultimately you kind of end up in a place where you maybe do have, you know, some structure, even if you're not viewing it that way, you know, or you're probably not getting ahead.
What, you know, because something I think that's interesting to me, and kind of going back into sort of the like kind of betting on yourself or going in on all in on yourself, you know, was, I think obviously if you have a career in what you've been doing for a certain time, the fear of it going away, or necessarily pre-pandemic, I don't think really ever is in your mind, because you are very much like, this is something I know how to do. I'm very confident in what I do and what I can bring to the table. But I am interested in kind of hearing you discuss if there were any trepidations from, you know, being at UTA to basically starting your own thing.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There were no trepidations in terms of, I knew for a fact it was what I wanted to do and I was going to do it. So I didn't have any reservations about actually doing it. But I did have concerns about the outcome. I was at a place where I was so unhappy working at UTA that the outcome, regardless of the outcome, I knew it was what I had to do. But I did have concerns about the outcome. You know, were all the artists going to want to follow? Were they going to want to be part of that bigger corporate agency and have a problem with it? Were they going to have an issue with the fact that, you know, maybe I don't represent some of the same bands I did there, because I knew when I left, I was going to be walking away from certain bands, because that was another big part of my decision with leaving, was not only leaving, but I decided I wasn't going to work with people I didn't enjoy working with anymore. So I actually, some of the largest bands I worked with, I had called their management and said, I'm leaving UTA and I don't want to work with you anymore, essentially. And so I didn't even give them a choice to come with me. So those were a lot of things that, like, they were big changes in my life. And I definitely wasn't sure how it was all going to unfold. I knew how I wanted it to unfold, but, you know, some of those decisions were out of my hands. And, but, you know, I just knew that, like, for my mental health, and for the longevity of just like my happiness and my, you know, my life and everything, it was something that I had to do. And so I did it. And fortunately, I was really fortunate that pretty much all my artists were like, you know, we're represented by you, not UTA. Like, we don't care what your email address is. Like, you're the guy that's been there for us. So wherever you work, like, that's great. And, you know, I knew, you know, certain artists were going to take that approach, but I didn't know, like, pretty much all of them would. And that was really cool. You know, I think when the three of us left UTA, myself and my two partners, between the three of us, there was about 150 bands, and like 148 came with us. So, of the ones that we wanted to come to bring with us. And that was, it was really humbling, man. It was really awesome. And, here we are 2 years in, and, regardless, the pandemic aside, it's been great. We're definitely looking forward to getting to the other side of the pandemic. That's obviously had a monumental impact on our business, but we'll, we're going to get to the other side of it. It's just a matter of when. So yeah, just doing our best to hang in there till we get to the other side,
I think the interesting thing about what you were just saying is kind of realizing that for yourself, that when you're basically starting this new chapter, starting anew, that you were willing and identified that basically, I don't want to just take everyone I've amassed. I want to take the people that I enjoy working with. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing that a lot of us sometimes don't think about in our lives. Like there are people where, you see I'm purging people on Facebook. Congratulations, you made it through the Facebook purge if you can read this kind of shit. But I think, collectively, we, like I said, sometimes don't assess those things where you're like, what's something that it may be beneficial to me in some capacity, whether it be financially, whether it be emotionally, whatever, but maybe in the grand scheme of things isn't really something I need in my life because of X, Y, or Z. And it's in not addressing those things, I think, actually, that sometimes causes unnecessary, I don't want to say drama necessarily, but, just this feeling where you're like when you get the phone call from someone, you're like, fucking, I hate this person. I don't know. And then you start going like, well, why? Why do I continually feed into this relationship? Why am I fostering it when it doesn't really add any value to my life? And it was kind of cool to hear you say, like, there were bands that, were maybe putting in words in your mouth, but basically a band that maybe is like, I've had them on my roster for a while, and they're great for what they do and they make me money and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just not into them. And you know what? Moving forward, I only want to be passionate about what I'm passionate about, because that's going to be an extension of me, of the brand, of the bands, and it's going to be putting our best foot forward. And I think that's something that a lot of us across the board don't do enough of. So I think that's very commendable that moving forward, you identified that as something that you and probably Tim and was it Mike, I think is the other one, were the ones that probably did the same thing, where you're like, look, moving forward, this is how we want to proceed with our company.
Yeah. I'm not going to say it was like a easy decision. And it was like, I've come to this conclusion, so I'm going to do this. It took me a lot of years to really, I knew I was really unhappy in certain relationships. You really articulated that well. It would be the type of thing where those people would call me and I'd pick up my phone and see who it was, and instantly every cell in my body would just frown. It was oh fuck. And there were people that I felt that way about that I'd been working with for a decade, Wow. And when I left UTA, I was leaving because I was unhappy there. So I had just finally, after all those years, come to the conclusion of, well, if I leave UTA because I'm not happy being there, but I still represent some of these people that I have to deal with that I'm unhappy working with, I'm not really ripping the Band-Aid off. I'm just pulling it off halfway. You know what I mean? And so I finally came to the conclusion that it's all or nothing. Otherwise, I might as well just stay at UTA and continue doing what I'm, doing it the way I'm doing it. And so, that was what I ultimately did. Ironically enough, it wasn't the artists. There were just some managers managers of the artists that I worked with that, I really had just, bad experiences with. And, it just got to the point. You hear this and it's a very cliche phrase, there's no amount of money that's worth it. And I obviously have heard that phrase many times in my life, but it never had an actual meaning to me until I got to a place where I was making pretty good money on certain artists, but I didn't even want the money. I was this, it doesn't matter how much more money this artist continues to make, like it's just not worth it. And I actually had some perspective to put to that phrase, and it was like, wow, like, yeah, there is no amount of money that's worth this. Like, I just can't wake up every day to a job that I used to love and like dread taking these phone calls. That's like the opposite of why I got into this. So ultimately, I just had to make those changes, and fortunately it did exactly what I wanted it to. It's been, life changing. It's been way better, and I've really enjoyed the job again. And the last 2 years, again, pandemic aside, have been, awesome. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Pandemic aside. Yeah, definitely excited to get to the other side of that. But
I don't know if this is going to make any sense, but thinking about your move to kind of basically doing something for yourself and on your own, when you think back to how long you have been in this career of yours, given how very self-motivating is not the word I necessarily want, but like basically in a lot of the other things that you do, it's very, I'm going to do this, and you just kind of set your mind to it and you go do it. Like to me, when you get to the top of a building and you're like, all right, I'm going to fucking do a double, moonsault off this motherfucker, and then, throw my chute and cool, that's it. I did all this time and all that, and you're literally kind of doing something and conquering a fear over and over again for the thrill of it. Does it kind of surprise you that maybe it took so long for you to strike out on your own and go do something and find that happiness? Because it seems like you're, from what, granted, this is the first time you and I are talking. This is completely from listening to other interviews and knowing people that have known you for a little while. But it seems like because of your passion for things, it seems to me that you would have come to this conclusion a lot faster because of just who you are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I appreciate that perspective. I think that, I think ultimately this is what I was like meant to be doing, is doing my own thing, and kind of doing it on my own terms and representing artists the way that I felt is the right way. But the reason I went to the first major agency I went to was a company called the Agency Group. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, I had done like a small independent thing for a number of years. And then I went there, and they were a very large agency, but they were like run more like an independent agency. So it was kind of cool because it was like, it wasn't corporate and like high pressure structure like that and stuff. But at the same time, it was large and you had leverage, and I learned a lot. I went to do that because it was pretty early in my career, and I felt I had a lot to learn, and I didn't want to learn it through trial and error. I wanted to, learn this stuff before I made all these mistakes and not damage artist careers, through the process and lose clients and all that. So I was there for 10 years at that company, and that company ultimately got acquired by UTA. That's how I ended up there. And when I went there, I was under contract. Like, that's how agent like jobs work, basically. Like, if you work for an agency, you usually have a contract and you're there for a certain amount of years, and then you renew your contract or you leave or whatever. So yeah, I had like a 3.5-year contract when I got to UTA. And, honestly, like I felt pretty strongly probably 1.5 years in that it wasn't the place for me, but I was under contract. So I think the agency group was like, that 10 years was really great for me. And it's kind of what I needed to get my career to ultimately where it went and where it is now. UTA was also a great learning experience because being in that like very large corporate environment, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what I don't want my agency to be. And don't get me wrong, like UTA is a great agency and there's a lot of great people there. It just wasn't for me, and I don't think it was for my artists. Like they're a big corporate agency and they want like the big flashy names. And my roster, a lot of the artists that I love to work with are artists that have great careers, make great livings doing what they do, but they're not on TV and on the radio every second. And, they're maybe not household names in terms of like that mainstream, kind of world, but, they're large artists with real businesses. And, I think that when you're at agencies like those, they're looking for those big flashy names, and it's hard to get support unless you have them. And again, that's nothing against those agencies. It's just what the big Hollywood agencies are. That's how they operate. That's how they make a big living, is doing, the film and TV with the music and kind of putting it all together. And they can only really do that for their like top 1% of clients. But the problem with that for me is that, my clients were just as much a priority to me as, whatever Post Malone was to UTA. And so being somewhere where like, you kind of felt like your artists were like almost like, second-rate citizens in a way, like it just didn't make sense. So I think the point I'm making, short story long, to answer your question, like I think in order to go out on my own and do Sound Talent Group, I had to experience a lot of the things I did over the previous 13, 14 years, because that's a lot of what I learned through that time is what I needed to learn. And I needed those skills to successfully run an agency like Sound Talent Group and do it the right way and be able to think about, like how to build it. Even though we've been a company only for a little over 2 years now, we've got over 20 employees, and we have, a number of agents that have come from larger agencies that have, come to work here instead of there, and things like that. And, like, I think that if I'd like gone out on my own earlier, I'm sure I could have done it, and I could have like, just had a career doing that and whatever. But it probably would have been me, maybe one or two other agents, friends, couple assistants, and that's it. Where now I feel like I have the knowledge and the experience and the skill set to think bigger and really open up a lot more doors for my clients, for my employees, for the other agents within the company, open up multiple business opportunities, even outside of booking. These are all things I've learned a lot about through all my different experiences. So yeah, I think you're right. Like that's kind of ultimately where I needed to be, but I actually feel pretty good it took as long as it did, because I think I was able to do this with the experience that I needed to do it the way that I want to do it, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. And I think kind of speaks to, I would say the perception of the perception of someone who would go climb a tall building or a rock formation or whatever and be like, that looks great, gonna jump off it now after all that work I just did of getting there. Although not everyone can maybe fly to the top of those things, so maybe you're cutting out some of that longer work to get up there. But regardless, I think it's one of those things where when you take the fear aspect of it away, which I think applies to business, I think fear is a great motivator to want to succeed and, or more importantly, not fail. Fear of failing will really be a great motivator for a lot of people to do some shit. And I think the thing is I think you probably have been able to take calculated risks because of what you do in your hobbies outside of work. And I think they directly correlate. So where maybe stepping out to you where you're like, it would almost be like flying, where you're like, the conditions aren't right. I could go and I would be fine, but the conditions aren't ideal. And I know that internally I probably shouldn't go, so I'm not going to. I'm not going to put myself in any unnecessary risk. And I think that, once again, it kind of informs your passion, and your hobbies has informed maybe how you proceed with your work life.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. It's like, when I got into base jumping, I didn't just go up to the top of the building and jump off of it. I trained a lot. I skydived a lot. I learned how to use a parachute. You kind of work your way up. And yeah, it's just like that. I think you got to be like, I try to be methodical about the decisions I make and not just, that's what I want to do, so I'm going to go do it. It's like, okay, if that's what I want to do, how do I get from here to there? What are the steps? How am I going to do it right? So I don't, so I don't falter along the way. And obviously you make mistakes and you learn from them. I'm not saying you don't. But, especially as an agent, like, I take the responsibility very seriously that, like, these artists' careers are in my hands, and they have families, they have wives, husbands, kids. And, if I don't go into these situations prepared and do my job right, like they're gonna have trouble putting food on the table for their families. Like, I take that responsibility very seriously, and I think that you have to be methodical about the way you go about these things, and you have to be able to advise these artists right, and you have to know what you're doing. And yeah, I mean, we're not doing brain surgery and no one's lives are on the line here, but at the same time, like, what we do does affect a lot of people. I mean, it's not just the artists, but their crew, and their teams, their managers, their lawyers, like, everyone's kind of involved in this business and making a living off of the touring. And so our jobs we're at the focal point of all the touring, and which is where the majority of the income comes from these days. COVID, of course, notwithstanding. But so yeah, man, I mean, I don't think it would be in my interest or the artist's interest to just haphazardly make these decisions.
Absolutely. Kind of shifting gears a little bit. We're a couple things I kind of wanted to touch on, just because I think it's kind of funny that this happens consistently. But you had kind of said leading up to this, you're like, hey, by the way, just so you're aware, like, I don't drink. Hopefully that's not a problem. And it's like, no. We don't typically talk about it on the show, but it is something where when we were coming up with the name, I like a good pun. And the thing that everyone was kind of saying about the show is how I get people to kind of open up and have, kind of brutally honest conversations with a stranger, essentially. And my co-host and I do like to drink and all that kind of stuff, but it was a thing where I was like, I like a good pun, something fun, something that will also, by when you search it this way, we're the first person or first thing that you'll see pop up. Because I wanted to get on top of, like, SEO results and all that kind of shit.
Sure, yeah.
So it was a thing where it was like, a little bit of pre-planning into the name. Although my co-host was like, you should call it clickbaity because that's my last name. And I was like, fuck no one is coming on that show. But it is a great name and I should use it for something else down the road. But
you should.
It's a thing where, in the last couple of weeks of the show, we had Shannon from Godsmack on, who's now sober for the last, I think he said 6 years or so. We've had Maruso from It Dies Today on, who's been sober now for quite a while. And actually, as a result of that, started his own coffee company, which now has a brick and mortar, which is insane to see that journey that he's gone on and stuff like that. So, I feel like it's a thing where it would be not disingenuous of us, but I think it's important for us sometimes where, maybe we do talk about, something we're drinking or whatever, but I think there also needs to be, for those that maybe are listening to this, that may be struggling with something or whatever, to hear stories about sobriety. Now, I know in talking with you and stuff like that, and even in one of your Instagram posts where I forget where you were going, but you brought a carton of Parliaments with you for somebody I think you were obviously going to see, but it was a thing where, it's a thing where it's like, I know obviously you're straight edge and have been for a very long time. So, I think it's fair that we tackle the other side of that on the show at times. And, I think this is a great example of having you kind of talk about your story to being straight edge and, in being probably in a high stress environment where maybe there are and plenty of opportunities to break edge, as it is known. So kind of tell us your story about that and how you've maintained over all these years.
Yeah. Well, when I was, much younger, middle school, high school, stuff like that, I grew up in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been straight edge since I was like 12 years old. Like I've literally never had a sip of alcohol. So when I was growing up in upstate New York, during that time, there was a huge straight edge hardcore scene in upstate New York. For anyone who was, into hardcore music, I mean, fuck, it's crazy to think about now, but I guess that was like 25 years ago. We had all the best straight edge hardcore bands. We had in upstate New York, we had One King Down, we had Earth Crisis, we had Snapcase, we had Shai Hulud, Path of Resistance. Just a few hours down the road and near Boston, we had Bane. Like all the straight edge hardcore bands were in that area. And so growing up, it was almost like a cultural thing. For me, it was like I got really into hardcore music, and like honestly, it was like kind of just the cool thing to do at the time, right? Like, it's like, oh, being straight edge is like the new cool thing. And then, but what ended up happening was, as I got a little bit older and got into high school, and then like, graduated from high school and stuff, I saw all my friends that I grew up with in that, kind of going to shows with and stuff start to slowly break edge. Like almost every single one of them. Pretty much all of them except one of my closest friends, who's still one of my closest friends. And I just never had a desire. Like at that point, I'd seen so many people, been around so many people when they were, drunk or high. And it was like always so unappealing, like watching it. And, people would be having fun, but it would be like, man, like, I don't really want to be like that. And, I always had, going back to some of our earlier discussion, but I always had like, these ideas in my head of like things I wanted to accomplish, and like, I want to do this and I want to do that. I want to accomplish these things and have these goals. And, I was a lot more focused on that. And I think that like when a lot of people were partying and stuff, I was just like, my head was just in a different place. Not, it's not better or worse, right or wrong. It's just like, that's where my head was at. Right. Like I was more focused on, these different things I wanted to do, whether it was getting my pilot's license back then, or, staying up late and while my friends were drinking, like working on routing a tour or whatever. Like those were just, like I said, it's not like I was doing anything right versus them wrong or, whatever. Like, I mean, a lot of my friends who do drink are very successful and, in our business and have achieved great things and stuff. So like everyone has their own way of doing stuff. But for me, like, I just never had I just never really had an interest in it. Like, and the more I was around it, the more I saw it, the less interested I got in it, especially as my career went on and I worked with artists who were great, talented people, and saw them go through these crazy downward spirals and have so many struggles, whether it be drug addiction or, alcohol addiction or whatnot. And a lot of them still struggle with it today. A lot of artists I work with. And, and I think that that's also like been something that's been cool about my career, is because I have been like the one person on most of my artist team that like they can't party with, because most people in the business, drink or do drugs or whatever. And, I think that's also given me a unique relationship with some of the artists who have struggled with that stuff, because they can talk to me about, some of their struggles in a different way. Because I'm not trying to get them to go out and party with me and stuff like that. So,
right.
Which a lot of other people are. So it's like, yeah, it's just a different thing. But, I've had people over the years be like, man, you must have so much willpower. You're around it all the time. And honestly, like I'm not saying I do or don't have willpower, but I don't. Willpower has nothing to do with it, because you need willpower to do something that you want to do, but you're trying to get yourself not to do.
Right.
I don't have any desire to do it, so it takes zero willpower to not do it. So I'm not trying to not give myself credit. I'm just making the point that like it really, I'm not doing, like I'm not like having to like try hard to not drink. Like I genuinely don't have an interest in it. So it's like, for some people, like they don't have an interest in base jumping. They're not like using willpower to not go jump off a building. Like they just don't want to do it. Right. Like, and that's kind of the same thing for me with drinking or, doing drugs or whatever. So, yeah, that's kind of my story behind that.
I do find it kind of interesting that I guess it totally makes sense when you say it, but it's not something I would have maybe thought of initially. And the fact that because of your adverse relationship to the scene that basically you're in by proxy, that you would then kind of be the one people would confide in when they're like, oh man, like I think I need to take a break from this, or like something needs to change, because you, like you said, you're not in it. You haven't never been in it, so it's not something you're able to offer a different perspective, or just a different, just basically a different perspective on it that will allow them to kind of work through their own shit or whatever. So I mean, that's kind of A, that's an interesting take, and B, I think it's really commendable to you as a person. I mean, very much like the way that I've had to address for me that it kind of gets hard for people to come and I like the fact that people will come to me to tell me things that are if they're having problems with something or whatever. But I've also addressed that it's also a problem for me personally, because it's kind of hard to take all that stuff on, and then like, well, now what do I do with it? It's I got tattooed yesterday, and I was talking to like my good friend while he was tattooing me, just kind of like we did it. He was like my first podcast guest, and I was like, I was thinking as I've been going through therapy about the question I asked you, where I was like, with shows like Cancer and all that kind of stuff, and everyone having the worst fucking story ever as to why they're on that show. I was like, do you feel like you're a cut rate therapist? And he was like, yeah, like I was tattooing this lady, whatever the hell it was. And I was like, oh, what made you, she was older and didn't have any tattoos. So I was like, oh, what made you finally decide to get, tattoo? And she was like, oh, I left my abusive husband who I'd been in this relationship for 25 plus years. And, it was going into detail about all this shit. And you're just like, oh,
yeah.
And then like, you hear like some of the, like and as I kind of was telling my therapist, I was like, it made me realize that like for him, maybe it makes me think of that you see that real evil exists in people when you hear these stories of what people have done to other people, that it's not just a story you hear on TV or whatever. It's someone who literally lived through some really wild, horrible shit that someone would either deem them not valuable enough to treat them that way or whatever. But it's one of those where it puts the real life monsters into perspective of this shit really exists.
Yeah.
And here's, an example of this. And then she kind of had made the comment, my therapist that was like, but maybe, and same with you, when people come to you, you're giving them a chance to break away from that, to give them a piece of themselves that they haven't had for a very long time, and to get, over those things and give them confidence in who they are now. And I was like, it's also another perspective of it I'd never really kind of thought of, but it's kind of interesting. And I was going to ask, when you started STG, did you go get a tattoo to commemorate it?
I have not because I'm pretty positive I'll end up with the STG logo at some point. I just haven't been able to get tattooed in a while. And the last few times I've got, I started a big like back piece a few years ago, and at this point it's just outlined. So like the last few times I've seen my artist, we've been working on that. But I'm sure at some point here I'll be getting the STG logo, one of these sessions for sure.
Yeah, I was pretty relieved. I only have a few more pieces on my leg, although I was like, are we doing my inner thigh piece next? Because that would seem to make sense. It's one of the last big spots on my leg left. He's like, no, we'll save that for last. I was like, thank God.
Yeah, it all sucks, man. Getting tattooed is brutal.
Yeah, actually, the one I got yesterday wasn't bad. It was because it's like right on the shin down by like my foot. So it's like that nice sweet spot where you don't really feel a whole lot. But then the other outsides of it, that was kind of gnarly. So I'm glad like the leg's almost done, but I had even made the comments like, yeah, I think when we're done with this leg, let's just do the back, even though I know that's going to suck terribly too. So I don't like sitting still. Laying on my stomach is even worse. So I know all of that's going to be not fun.
Nah, none of it's fun, but that's the process, man. It's brutal.
It is. Something I kind of wanted to bring up the last two questions I have for you. So sure. I was thinking, obviously for those who don't know, you're a big Iron Maiden fan, and a big parallel between Iron Maiden and you is that Bruce is a pilot as well. How close through your connections have you ever been to being able to co-pilot with Bruce, or is that even something you would want to do?
So I've got a lot of like 1 degree of separation with Iron Maiden connections. I have friends at the company that manages Maiden. I was the agent for Bruce's son's band for a number of years when they were together. So, so I've had a lot of opportunities, kind of to be around those guys, but they're like the one band I've never really had an interest in getting to know because I'm such a huge fan. Like, I've seen over the years, with my experiences in the business, like you learn pretty quickly, like the way that people are on a personality level really has an effect on the way you listen to their music.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes both ways. Like when you meet people that are really cool, like you like their music that much more because you want them to win, and you're like you really want to support them. But the flip side's true too. And I'm such a huge fan of theirs that like they're the one band I just haven't wanted to ruin it at all, even though I have heard they're really amazing people and never heard anything but great things about them. I did meet a few of the guys once kind of by accident, which was kind of a funny story. I went to see them play, and I flew myself up to the show. It was a couple hours from San Diego where I live. And I flew up, and after the show, I went back to the airport to fly home, and the band was there. They were flying out, and they had, the next day was an off day or whatever, and they were like, I guess a bunch of them were going to Vegas. So I went to the bathroom just to go take a piss or whatever before I was going to the plane to leave, and they're all in there changing. Like not all of them. There were like, I guess 3 of the guys were in there, and I walk in, I'm wearing an Iron Maiden shirt, and I'm like, I have to take a piss, and they all look at me like, I could tell they're thinking like, this fucking kid like followed us to the airport. Like, I could tell they're like, annoyed, like, this fan is just like following us. So I was just like, great show, guys. And then they all just kind of looked at me, and I left the bathroom, and I went out, and I was with my wife and my friend and his wife. And, I was like, Maiden's in the bathroom. So my buddy goes in the bathroom, and he like isn't really a Maiden fan. He's like a programmer, doesn't have tattoos. He starts talking to Adrian, one of their guitar players, and, whatever. They walk out of the bathroom. I hear them talking, and I hear Adrian be like, oh, what are you doing here? And my buddy, I heard him saying that as they were walking around the corner, like, oh, my friend's actually a huge Iron Maiden fan. I just saw your show, and he's also a pilot. So we flew up for the show, and now we're flying back. And as he tells him that, they turn the corner, and I kind of see Adrian's face realize like, oh man, that kid that we were just kind of rude to, like, he's just flying home. Like, and it's a coincidence. He didn't like follow us here. So it was really funny. He felt super bad. I could tell. He came up to me and was like overcompensating and was like being so nice and was like, hey man, like, I just met your buddy and like heard you flew up for the show. That's super cool. And, was asking me about flying and everything. So that was really cool. Like, so yeah, we got to talk for a few minutes, and, but I've never like tried to fly with Bruce or anything like that, or had any, aspirations to really spend too much time with them. I mean, if I had the opportunity, like in a more personal way, like, go meet Bruce at the airport and go fly, like that'd be pretty damn cool. But yeah, I've just always kind of wanted to keep those, that one separate. I'm just such a huge fan. Like I have their limited edition pinball machine. Like I've got like over 50 Maiden shirts. I have all like the Eddie toys, like, so yeah, I just don't want to like, ruin that.
No, absolutely. It's kind of funny. Like, Eddie was sort of the inspiration for the podcast logo when we changed. I was like, I want something that we can change over time, maybe every like year or two or something like that. We change. It's the same graphic. It's the same person. But he becomes like Eddie, where it's like every album cover, he's different. Something changes about him. And I was like, and that would be fun and could lead to fun, like limited edition merch drops and stuff like that. if anyone ever gave a shit. But like the focal point was more like it'd be cool to have something to where eventually, even if we don't have the name on it, you see the thing and you know it's ours.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think like, we've done a pretty good job with that. We haven't changed it yet, but that's something we're still kind of in the works. And plus, we're in the very, very infancy stages of trying to maybe get a coffee blend through the Bean Bastard done. And so it'd be great for branding purposes just to throw that dude on something. In talks with a company here in Grand Rapids that just did one of the 12 Run the Jewels beers, of doing something with them. And then kind of the same thing. It's like, well, you have a podcast, like throwing your podcast name on it. That's tacky as shit. No one's going to care, but throw a cool logo on something. And it's like, if no one knows what it is and it just is a cool thing on a can or whatever, like,
yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
So it was a thing for me where it was just like, okay, like to me, having the podcast initially with my name and literally my face, I was like, well, I feel like a fucking asshole, like with a co-host who's not involved in anything and he's on the show with my name on it because I couldn't come up with anything more clever. And then it was just like, okay, like let's do something cool and fun. And even though I'm not the biggest Iron Maiden fan at all, I can respect the career they've had and the legacy and all the bands they've influenced, obviously. It was just something where like they were kind of a big influence from a marketing and branding standpoint for me. But it is one of those things where when you kind of get to potentially meet some of your idol. I don't want to say idols. That sounds kind of tacky. When you get to meet someone that you've been a fan of for a very long time, but you share a common passion that's not the norm, where you're like, oh my God, you're so-and-so from this band. And oh, let me tell you about all the things I love with this. But instead of that, be like, here's a very niche thing you and I share in common. Let's go do this thing and just kind of nerd out about this. And to me, I feel like that would be the thing, given how close proximity-wise, maybe in the industry you are to Bruce, that maybe you would be like, hey, like through some connections, we're going to go rent a helicopter and take turns flying around wherever the fuck we decide to go fly around at. And just for, a couple hours, that's the thing. And it's more of a bonding experience as people. And I think to me, it would seem like that would be something maybe you would have tried to have facilitated at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think, that would be awesome. And Austin, his son, who I used to work with, like used to always try to introduce us. In fact, I went to an Iron Maiden show with Austin and he was like, oh, like come meet my dad. And I was like, no, that's cool. Like I just, I really just was, like it's like something that's like sacred. You know what I mean? I just kind of I don't want to ruin it. Because, you're in the business long enough, you kind of get to meet everyone. And, and that's one that I still want to remain like special,
Absolutely. I'd be remiss if I didn't get to ask you the Coolio story that Dewey told me to ask you about.
Oh my God. I don't know how appropriate that is for the listeners.
I mean, I'm literally wearing a Bone Thug shirt, so at least it's on topic.
All right, well, the first time I met with Coolio, man, that's a crazy story. I want to be clear that all I'm telling you is what he did. These aren't my words. These aren't my.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Conduit to the story.
Yeah, that's all I am. I met with him. He was looking for a new agent. This was like, man, this must have been like 10 years ago. I was his agent for a little bit after this meeting. He ended up deciding to work with me, and then I actually decided to stop working with him like a year later when he got arrested for crack possession at LAX, and it became this huge like PR thing. And I was like, I don't think I need to be in the middle of this. But he poured. I told Dewey this story like the other day, so it was fresh on his mind, I'm sure. Coolio was bragging to me about all the tail he gets, as he puts it. And he had a bottle of water that I'd given him when he came into the office. And he asked me to put out my hand, and he poured it on my hand and then told me that's how wet he makes pussies.
That is so unbeknownst to you. So I sent Dewey that clip I sent you earlier. There when we started off. So I sent him that. I was like, dude, since I know I was talking to Dave, like I've just had this scene and this quote in my head. And then we were going back and forth with it. He's like, "Oh, what movie is that from?" And then he's like, "Oh, I didn't make it past like the Ben Stiller shitting his pants scene." I was like, "Oh, it's a good movie. Like, I like it." Philip Seymour Hoffman just playing a completely like loose cannon character. It's funny. And then I was making the comment. I was like, "But recently, like my other favorite Ben Stiller scene, like Ben Stiller has great quotes, but they're not necessarily his. It's somebody else in the movie that has a great fucking quote. Like, meet the parents. I got nipples. Greg, can you milk me?" Had nothing to do with Ben Stiller, but it's a Ben Stiller movie. So this one was the Philip Seymour Hoffman, white chocolate, and he's like just a terrible basketball player. And then the scene I played earlier, but I was like, my other one is the scene between Jerry and Ben, his dad, from Heartbreak Kid. And it literally opens the movie. And he's like, "Are you out there crushing pussy?" And I was like, just the concept of crushing pussy as a phrase just makes me laugh every fucking time. And the fact that it's Jerry Stiller doing it, and he has that like head is like enunciation to it where he's like, "You out there crushing pussy?" And it's just like, what the fuck? Like, what an absurd, like, I can't imagine being in a writer's room and then just being like, what's going to be fucking great? Crushing pussy. Or like the story of someone probably being like, so I had this friend, and like he would come in and he's like, "All right, guys, we're gonna go out there and just crush some pussy tonight, like, when we go out to the club," or something like that. And it's just like, ew.
Yeah.
Like, fucking ew.
Stiller, man, he Seinfeld, his role, it's so good.
If you follow Costanza-grams on Instagram, they posted that like outtake with between him and Elaine, and it was George, and the girl that I think is actually from that 70s show is the sister, but I can't remember her name in real life. And they're at like what appears to be like a precinct or like some kind of a lobby or something. And he's doing that thing of like, "You saying you want a piece of me?" But like it's the outtakes, and like Julie Louis-Dreyfus or whatever is just like cracking up. Like I've been playing that so much. My wife hates Seinfeld, doesn't think it's funny.
You should also know my wife and my friends are downstairs, and they've been hanging out the whole time. And I heard them go silent when I told the Coolio story. And I don't think I've told all of them that story before. So that's
I guess that's a great segue to wrap this up. So you can go tell that story and get some more laughs out of it. Where can everyone find you, or whatever you would like to plug on your socials or whatever?
Yeah, when are you going live with this?
All right, so I just dropped the chat episode like a couple hours ago. Dewey will be next, and then you. So it'll be 2 weeks from now.
Okay, great. Well, then a great thing to mention would be because on February 4th, we're announcing the relaunch of Velocity Records. And very excited. We're announcing a bunch of signings. So I would say check out velocityrecords.com for sure. That'd be really cool. There's a lot of great bands and great new music we're going to be announcing and putting out, and everything from new bands you've never heard of that we're really excited to share with you, on up to old bands that a lot of people will know and are putting out new music.
That would explain why you're going to be on Pure Pleasure again then, because Dewey said you had something that you were doing that hasn't been announced yet. So I guess that's what it is.
That is it. Yep.
Well, thank you again for taking the time. It was a pleasure getting to talk to you, and someone I've long wanted to for a long time, but just had no real connection on how to do it, or would even think that you would want to, just because it seems like you don't necessarily do a whole lot of these. So very much appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and I can't wait for everyone else to laugh downstairs about that story.
Sounds good, man. Thanks. I'll talk to you soon.
It sucked. Oh, that fucking sucked. Shao Kahn, what'd you think?
That was pathetic.
Yeah. Yeah. Coach, what'd you think?
Fucking embarrassing!
Okay. Okay. I mean, I knew it was gonna fucking suck, but I think those guys were a little rude. Austin Powers?
How about new?
Okay, I thought we were going to get the Austin Powers vote. We did not. John, use that for your podcast. It fucking sucks. But you knew what you were getting into. It's your own fault. It will result in less listens. You're going to see a decline in listeners if you start the show with that. You're going to see 30 seconds in, the number will plummet. And I will be there at the bottom of the plummet saying, I fucking told you, don't use this fucking riff. It sucks. But it's yours.